Story 1. Hepatitis A after traveling. The onset was severe. I had fever and convulsions. I had never been that sick in my life. Then came the long-lasting symptoms. I couldn't eat anything sugary, fatty, or processed. I basically only ate salad. My liver hurt constantly, and I threw up everything. I recall a painful memory of eating a small piece of chocolate and regretting it immediately. I couldn't even eat chocolate, which is my favorite thing in the world. It was very difficult. It healed after 3 months. Thank God it healed. Story 2. Migraine. It hurt too much to sleep, then it hurt too much to eat, then it hurt too much to breathe. Story 3. Inner ear infection. It may not sound like much, but it felt like having a rusty ice pick poking deep into the ear for a week and a half, with constant nausea, dizziness, and all the unpleasant symptoms of a high fever. It was not a fun experience. Story 4. Caught coronavirus disease. Coughed so hard I basically caused a tear in my vertebral artery and still have a pseudoaneurysm sitting at the base of my brain, just kind of taunting me. Also, I am pretty sure it triggered an autoimmune disorder. Story 5. COVID-19. Never recovered from it. Long COVID group. I really miss being able to taste and smell. I also feel like I have aged about a decade since my second bout of it. Story 6. Extreme anxiety. Beyond that, the most terrifying experience was coronavirus disease 2019. I had no symptoms except brain fog. When I tried to read an email and truly could not begin to comprehend the text, it scared me deeply. Story 7. Stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer. I have been fighting it for almost 2 years now. Remission is coming soon. Story 8. Ankylosing spondylitis. Ankylosing spondylitis is an autoimmune disease. It is inflammatory arthritis that affects the spine and other joints. As ankylosing spondylitis worsens, new bone forms as part of the body's attempt to heal. This new bone gradually bridges the gaps between vertebrae and eventually fuses sections of vertebrae together. Fused vertebrae can flatten the natural curves of the spine, causing an inflexible, hunched posture. For 10 years, I lived with back pain that progressively worsened to the point where rolling over in bed was a genuine challenge. Walking became almost impossible, and I looked like a 90-year-old, stiff as a board. 10 years of visiting doctors, getting weekly massages, physiotherapy, and sports physiotherapy, being told all I needed was yoga or Pilates and to strengthen imbalanced areas in my body. While these therapies may help, they are not a solution to ankylosing spondylitis. It is a cruel disease. Thankfully, I was finally diagnosed in my early 30s and have found medication that will hopefully help me live a relatively normal life. I need to take an epinephrine pen-like drug every month for the rest of my life. It is a nuisance, but a deal I would make without hesitation. Story 9. I don't know, but poverty is a serious condition that I have experienced. It affects everything, especially when you cannot afford doctor or hospital visits. Story 10. Long COVID affected my memory. I had trouble recalling common words for many things. For example, I kept calling the mailbox the garage and asked, "Did somebody get the papers from the garage?" I believe this improved after 2 years. I recently completed my antibiotic treatment for Lyme disease. The joint pain was intense. My fingers and left shoulder still hurt. Polycystic ovary syndrome has been a challenge for most of my life. Story 11. Anxiety. I had shingles, back and hip pain, arthritis, but anxiety is what ruined my life. I waited way too long to get help, and it cost me everything. Story 12. I have had fibromyalgia for the past 30 years. It is difficult to remember what feeling good is anymore. The pain, brain fog, depression, and anxiety take more and more of me each day. The emotional pain of knowing that it is difficult for my children to remember me before it began. Story 13. I developed a lump in my breast after hitting it hard on a shelf while trying to grab something. The lump grew and turned into an abscess. I went to urgent care when it first felt hot and later visited the emergency room when the medication did not seem to work. I ended up with a drug-resistant streptococcus infection in my breast tissue. Over the course of a week, under observation, antibiotics, and home care, the abscess opened and released about a quarter cup of pus. This led to my hospital admission, where blood cultures were taken every 12 hours, and I received 3 types of intravenous antibiotics administered over a 6-hour period within 24 hours. I stayed in the hospital for 4 days, and they were concerned I could become septic. What caused my $45,000 hospital stay in America? I reached up to a shelf and stood up too quickly, hitting my breast hard on the corner of the shelf. Bruises apparently only need a small amount of germs and a weakened immune system due to stress to become infected. I had to have the wound cut open and cleaned out to remove all the infection after 3 days on intravenous antibiotics. Story 14. When I was 19 and working with livestock, I had a severe bout of leptospirosis, bedridden for 2 weeks. About a month later, I contracted Q fever and was bedridden for another 3 weeks. It was not as bad as what some people experience, but it was horrific. Story 15. Pneumonia and pleurisy together, specifically dry pleurisy. I had complications from surgery just prior and was on blood thinners. I was coughing with an inflamed, sandpaper-like pleural lining, and I kept bleeding, coughing up blood, and choking on the blood. I ended up needing to be intubated and placed in an induced coma, which was very painful. The only positive was that they initially thought I had tuberculosis, so I was in a private pod. Story 16. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. It was awful, but I have overcome it and have been happy and at peace for 4 years now. Story 17. Shingles on my face was very painful. I experienced nerve pain for about a year and obvious scarring. People say they cannot tell, but I do not believe them. I do not understand how anyone cannot see several dime-sized concave scars that are a different color than the rest of my face. Story 18. I have had many issues mentioned in this thread, but the one that has caused me the most suffering is acne. Story 19. Scarlet fever when I was a kid, but I do not remember much. My skin peeled a lot from the fever. The entire palm of my hand peeled off. Story 20. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome combined with Lyme disease and co-infection. 10 years with undiagnosed Lyme disease. It was hell. Everyone stopped believing I was even sick, so there was no real support system. Then hard treatment for Lyme disease, and when that was done, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Story 21. Coronavirus disease 2019, closely followed by swine influenza, dengue fever, and dysentery. All of them were difficult, but long-term effects of coronavirus disease 2019 caused me problems for over a year. Story 22. Hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's disease. You do not realize how off you feel until you are on the right dose of medication and suddenly feel great again. Sometimes your body changes, and you do not realize how poorly you feel until your dose has to be adjusted. You repeat this process over and over for the rest of your life and hopefully do not pass it down to your offspring. I genuinely would not wish it on my worst enemy. Story 23. I was exposed soon after birth and had repeated exposures for years. Overall, the disease lasted close to 20 years before my immune system was finally strong enough to eliminate it from my veins. I barely made it through. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. Story 24. Catching coronavirus the first time was very difficult, and I am still dealing with the long-term effects. Temporarily, I would definitely say catching Staphylococcus infection was brutal until the medication took effect. Story 25. Hyperthyroidism. Hot and speedy all the time. Heart racing constantly. Medication controlled it for a while. Developed Graves' disease, an eye condition causing significant eye and vision problems. Just before COVID-19, developed 2 large goiters over 4 months. Surgery was scheduled as soon as possible during the first months of total shutdown. A severe thunderstorm knocked out power minutes before I was headed to the operating room. The surgery was delayed half an hour because they did not want to start while the hospital was on generator power. A large ragged incision was made at the base of my neck, resembling a chainsaw cut. I bled heavily and required 2 blood transfusions. Vomited for hours from the anesthetic. Received a large calcium dose post-operation and developed hypercalcemia, another medical emergency. The surgeon gave me a week off work. The endocrinologist added another 14 weeks. It took almost 2 years to recover. Story 26. Lyme disease feels like it has short-circuited my nervous system and caused ongoing muscle weakness and pain. Story 27. Chlamydia. I was still in primary school, so we had not had sex education classes yet. I was asymptomatic and did not even know I had it. It went untreated and caused pelvic inflammatory disease. I was just starting puberty, so the pelvic inflammatory disease went undiagnosed because every symptom was dismissed as either normal hormonal changes or a teenager being melodramatic and trying to get out of physical education. By the time it was diagnosed, I was in my 20s, and the pelvic inflammatory disease had basically ravaged my insides and left me sterile. Story 28. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome and long coronavirus disease after an infection in 2022. Went from generally healthy to a heart rate in the 170s just from standing to wash dishes. Not a great time. Story 29. Swine flu. I have never felt closer to death in my entire life. I have suffered a heart attack, many grievous injuries after a motorbike crash, and been in 2 life-or-death violent situations. Swine flu completely robbed me of my ability to think, process information, breathe, eat, sleep, or otherwise exist in my body. A week straight of intense out-of-body-mind fog combined with a level of fatigue and malaise that is difficult to fathom, even while experiencing it. Story 30. Complex regional pain syndrome. I am lucky enough that it is confined to my left thigh. Some people have it all over. I experience an extreme burning sensation in my left thigh along with constant swelling. Sometimes my thigh turns pale or reddish in color. I have a spinal cord stimulator to help with the pain, but this is a lifelong condition. I will have to have the battery replaced in about 8 years on the device, and then every 10 years thereafter. Story 31. Anorexia is a profound challenge. It impacts you emotionally, physically, financially, your relationships, and your views on life in general, just about everything. On top of that, treatment is exceptionally expensive and often unattainable if you want adequate care. One place we considered required thousands of dollars up front and did not accept insurance. If you needed a sick call with the doctor specified as 12 minutes, it would cost $95. I have poured all of my time, energy, and money into treatment and still struggle on a daily basis. Story 32. I posted this somewhere else about Bell's palsy. I literally could not move half of my face to the point where I struggled to eat. Thank God it was not permanent. Story 33. Cholestasis of pregnancy is quite literally torture. I was itchy for 13 weeks, all night, every night. I scratched myself up so badly. It went away right after I gave birth, thank goodness. Story 34. COVID would be second compared to congestive heart failure that I was diagnosed with after COVID. It was so severe that I needed a pacemaker installed. Story 35. Viral meningitis felt like someone was squeezing my brain from the inside. It was the worst headache you can imagine that lasted about a month. There was no real treatment at the time except for Tylenol and ibuprofen. The spinal tap for diagnosis was very painful. Story 36. Chronic migraine. If I had $1 for every time someone tried to give me unsolicited advice, we might be able to fund the research to find out how migraine works by now. Story 37. Honestly, I'm not sure if it counts, but I caught hand, foot, and mouth disease when I was a preschool teacher about 5 years ago. I'm pretty sure I almost lost my life. My fever was consistently between 104 and 105 degrees Fahrenheit. I started hallucinating and seeing things. I had an extreme tingling sensation in my hands and feet. My heart felt like it was stopping and starting every 5 seconds. The pain in my hands and feet was excruciating. Story 38. Currently a toss-up between coronavirus disease 2019 and post-traumatic stress disorder, depending on the day. The first bout with coronavirus disease 2019 damaged my hearing, and I developed Meniere's disease after having it. The second bout left me with episodes of severe tachycardia. Being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder completely changed my perspective on life and made me realize I have a lot of healing to do. Story 39. Severe anemia made me think I was going to die. I was too scared to go to the doctor because I thought it was cancer. By the time I finally went, I needed infusions and was told I probably would have died if I had gotten injured. It was all caused by hemorrhoids. I had to undergo endoscopy and colonoscopy to rule out other causes. I couldn't breathe properly due to undiagnosed asthma. I felt lightheaded every time I stood up or bent over. My heart would race constantly. I was ghostly white, constantly tired, and I couldn't remember anything. I still feel guilty because I was not there for my children like I wanted to be since I was so miserable. Shingles were also very painful. Not only itchy, but they hurt a lot. Story 40: lupus, asthma, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and COVID-19 the very first time I caught it in 2021. Lupus is the worst by far. Story 41: flesh-eating bacteria infected my foot. It started turning black. I thought to myself, I better get this fixed quickly or it could become ugly, putrid, and toxic flesh. Story 42: mastitis came on very suddenly. In the afternoon, I was feeling achy, and by evening I had a fever of 103 degrees Fahrenheit. My doctor prescribed antibiotics, and my husband went to pick them up. While he was gone, I became so weak that I could not hold my baby. I had to drag myself across the bed to put him in his bassinet. He was crying, but I could only lie in bed. My vision had a strange yellow tint, and I could barely lift my arms. I truly believe I would have died without the antibiotics. Story 43: physically, tonsillitis. I am a rare case who nearly suffocated to death because my tonsils were so swollen and leaking with pus. I still have my tonsils because, even though they said they would need to cut my throat open if the antibiotics did not work, I did not meet the removal requirements. I still get tonsillitis every year and become paranoid, taking antibiotics religiously because I do not like the idea of having a hole in my throat. Story 44: vaginismus. I am 36 and still cringe at the thought of having sex because it has always been painful and unnatural to me. I was fortunate to participate in an experimental trial for botulinum toxin for vaginismus. It made it possible to have sex, and now I have 2 beautiful children. It is less painful, but I still have so much trauma from the pain that I cannot enjoy sex. It feels unnatural. I feel terrible for my husband. Story 45: I am surprised no one has posted about eating disorders. They can be devastating. Maybe they are still too stigmatized and shameful to talk about, even anonymously. Story 46: COVID-19 emerged in late 2019. Doctors could not identify it. It was worse than double pneumonia. I legitimately lay in bed one night and knew I was dying. My brain was not working right. I thought, I should call emergency services. But I knew I did not have the strength to go to the door. If they broke it down, the cat would get out and could die. That was so upsetting I called no one. It was the longest night of my life. Story 47: testicular torsion was pretty bad. Maybe not the worst because I kept joking about Adam and Eve dying. Yes, I was under the influence of a copious amount of pharmaceutical drugs overseen by a medical doctor. To clarify, I was referring to my testicles when I said Adam and Eve. Story 48: rabies. Not even joking, I got bitten by a rabid cat. I am one of the few people who has shown symptoms and has not died. Story 49: chronic kidney disease caused kidney failure in 2021, followed by a transplant soon after. The journey was very challenging. Story 50: the 2 conditions I was born with affect my spine and legs. I prefer not to go into specifics. Story 51: gastroparesis. Being nauseous and vomiting constantly is difficult enough. It has also been the direct cause of my heart failure, the gradual failure of my remaining gastric system, and multiple deficiencies. Additionally, there are no effective treatment options. Story 52: has anyone here had malaria? I got very sick when I came back from Africa earlier this year. I know I must have caught something on the plane coming home. That said, I was very paranoid I had caught malaria even though I had taken malaria prophylaxis during the entire trip. Story 53: adenoma is a calcium-producing tumor that causes kidney stones and damage to other filtering organs. Malaria is the second most common condition. Story 54: I am choosing anemia over hepatitis because I remember the whole month when I could not even take 3 steps to the bathroom without almost fainting. My mother helped me with everything because I used to have episodes of delirium due to fever. Story 55. It is a toss-up between malaria and shingles. I honestly think shingles was worse. Endometriosis and adenomyosis have not been pleasant either, nor was mononucleosis. Story 56. When I was a child, I had streptococcal infection so severe that my doctor said if I got it again that bad, I would lose the ability to talk. Story 57. I caught pneumonia in 8th grade on my family's first day at the beach. I woke up in the middle of the night coughing, sweating, and freezing. I think my parents thought I was dying. The whole vacation was awful. They got to go to the beach all day, and I stayed inside watching daytime television in the year 2000. I had pneumonia for 3 months, 3 months of difficulty breathing, random fevers, chills, and sweats. I missed football that year and could barely get out of bed. It was intense. Story 58. Intracranial hypertension. Nearly went blind. Had brain surgery. Saved my vision, but I still have a daily headache like a migraine every day. Story 59. Schizophrenia, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, bipolar disorder, thyroid problems, gallbladder issues, or heart attack. Take your pick. The start of dementia. Story 60. I do not know if it helps your situation, but my mother has that condition, and Botox injections, targeted of course, on her face do the trick. No other medications can alleviate her symptoms. It is the only treatment that has given her even a glimpse of relief in over 8 years. She no longer drops glasses or falls down after an attack. I had a friend who spent his entire retirement savings on the Gamma Knife solution, and it did not work at all, but that was 15 years ago. Story 61. Does Clostridioides difficile infection count? Your gut microbiome being completely wiped out and developing irritable bowel syndrome after never having bowel issues before is unacceptable. As far as mental health, obsessive-compulsive disorder. Story 62. Aggressive athlete's foot. Getting goosebumps because of the intense itch that you know you shouldn't scratch. Crying while applying the cream that did not work at all. Bad times. I found a cure here. A woman shared her treatment and the problem was gone. What prescription pills and cream did not do in a year, the combination cured in 2 weeks. I feel itchy just typing this. Story 63. Osteomyelitis due to staphylococcus of the hip bone, sacroiliac joint, and right flank. I had to be on intravenous antibiotics for a few months. The infection relapsed twice, requiring a second course of intravenous antibiotics. I had abscesses that tunneled and ruptured through the skin, resulting in multiple incisions and drainages and removal of dead tissue. It started with a sepsis diagnosis. My parents invited my best friend to the emergency room to see me in case I did not survive. I was 21 years old. Story 64. Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That's a disease, right? I caught it from one of my children when I worked at a daycare. The mother knew the child had it and still decided to drop her off. I got it and had a lump the size of an orange on my arm. The infection grew too quickly and too large, so the doctor refused to wait until the following day to operate under anesthesia. He gave me some numbing shots which did not work at all and just cut it away. I felt everything. I was screaming and kicking in the doctor's office. I couldn't stand the mother after that. Story 65. Pancreatitis. I developed it in my teens due to a minor defect in my pancreas. It was the worst pain I have ever experienced. Story 66. Fibromyalgia, narcolepsy, depression, but I always feel grateful that it is not worse. It would be nice to wake up feeling rested and actually have energy for the day though. Story 67. Psoriatic arthritis was probably always an underlying health condition that would eventually show its unpleasant symptoms, but the severe reaction I had to the coronavirus disease vaccine intensified it significantly. It also caused me to develop tinnitus. I want to preface that I am not against vaccination. My body just cannot handle it. Story 68. Postpartum depression. I have had depression since my teens, but postpartum depression was severe. It took me far too long to seek treatment for either, but I am in a good place mentally now, thanks to antidepressants. Story 69. Bacterial pneumonia. caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae, made me cough so hard that I started leaking spinal fluid and urinated in my pants daily. Story 70. Compared to others, this is something minor. I dealt with chronic idiopathic urticaria for 9 months beginning in late 2019. It was horrible trying to get treatment during the pandemic. Story 71. Hand, foot, and mouth disease in an adult. Sores on my tonsils that felt much worse than strep throat. I felt like I was swallowing glass when I tried to eat. Blisters all over my buttocks and a very high fever. Fortunately, I did not get blisters on my hands and feet, but having them all over my buttocks was the absolute worst. I could barely sit down. Story 72. Sepsis. I looked like the Walking Dead when I finally got out of the hospital, and it took over 6 months before I started feeling normal again. Story 73. I had hepatitis C. I had to go through an 11-month treatment to get rid of it. It severely affected my mental health and put me in very poor physical condition as well. I lost about 25 kilograms of weight and had to inject a hormone to increase my white blood cells. The treatment was horrible, but the illness itself eventually causes cirrhosis in a large percentage of patients. Story 74. End-stage renal failure. Been on dialysis for about 4 years. Good times, would not recommend unless you have to. Story 75. Cytomegalovirus is very challenging, especially for heart transplant patients like me. Story 76. Mononucleosis was difficult because I did not get it as a teenager like most people. I was a full-grown adult with a job. Before anyone asks, I did not kiss the person I caught it from. It is just that contagious because it is part of the herpes family, and those viruses are extremely contagious. The fatigue was the worst part. I have never felt so tired that I could fall asleep standing upright before or since then. I slept a great deal. Story 77. I have Behçet's disease, endometriosis, pudendal neuralgia, sacroiliitis, fibromyalgia, degenerative disc disease, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and a couple of other conditions. Behçet's disease is by far the most painful. The mouth and genital ulcers are the worst when they are at least half an inch in diameter. You cannot eat, talk, or urinate without extreme pain and significant bleeding. It started when I was younger than 12, and I will have it for life. I am 37 now. Pudendal neuralgia, when it flares severely, is almost as painful, but I am on many immune suppressants to relieve most of the symptoms of Behçet's disease. It is a combination of pain, nearly losing my sight, and the complications from the immune suppressants such as sepsis, pneumonia, and numerous hospitalizations. However, these medications are truly life-saving, even if they might one day cause harm. Quality over quantity every time. Endometriosis is the least painful but still causes many issues. Gastroesophageal reflux disease is more annoying than painful and can be well controlled by diet and medication. It flares due to all the medications I am on. Story 78. I have something called mouth and genital ulcers with inflamed cartilage syndrome, which is the combination of two extremely rare autoinflammatory diseases, Behçet's disease and relapsing polychondritis. I experience a severe combination of extremely painful ulcers and red, inflamed ears and nose. The challenging aspect of having relapsing polychondritis is that if the airway is involved, there is a 75% 5-year survival rate. I have airway involvement, but mine is mild so far, so I am probably not in the 25% mortality rate. The worst symptom I have had so far is tissue necrosis due to vascular damage and inflammation. In short, necrosing genital ulcers. Story 79. Chikungunya. I couldn't move for a couple of days, but the worst part was not being able to close my hands without pain for about 2 years. Story 80. Myalgic encephalomyelitis/chronic fatigue syndrome, autism spectrum disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I literally want to die every day because I do not have the energy to get off my couch, enjoy anything, or change anything. I cannot die because I have children who would miss me. There is no cure and no treatments. I just sit on the couch all day. Story 81. Kidney disease. I went to the hospital at 25 for severe stomach pain one night. They saw my blood pressure was extremely high and kept me for a week. They discovered I had stage 3 kidney disease, possibly as a result of the high blood pressure. As long as it does not get any worse, I should be fine. Story 82. I am so blessed. The worst disease I have had is being overweight. My poor child had brain cancer, and my father is receiving palliative chemotherapy. I am grateful my imperfect body is healthy and can care for my loved ones. Story 83. Clostridioides difficile infection. I would use a poop emoji, but it is smiling, and Clostridioides difficile infection is nothing to smile about. I caught it from taking clindamycin. Story 84. Scarlet fever was very unpleasant. I was constantly itchy for 2 weeks, and then all my skin peeled off. Story 85. Behçet's disease. Behçet's disease is somewhat similar to lupus, but it often takes longer to diagnose and, as a result, to treat. I would not recommend it. Story 86. Hidradenitis suppurativa. I have had type 1 diabetes since I was 3 years old. I understand diabetes well. I have been fighting this disease since my teens, and it is just getting worse. Story 87. Apparently, in the 1980s, I had fifth disease. I still do not know what it is. I was feverish and swollen. My skin broke open at my knuckles. Horrible. Story 88. I haven't had a really bad experience per se, but my grandfather contracted malaria and did not finish his studies. His friends with similar grades all ended up as professors in American universities. Story 89. Tuberculosis. I worked in a nursing home for retired nuns as a certified nursing assistant. The silver lining is I lost 25 pounds. Story 90. It's between ulcerative colitis, alcoholism, and decompensated cirrhosis. I think the decompensated cirrhosis takes the lead with all the side effects. Story 91. Endometriosis. I had 8 surgeries and it came back a third time. Pneumonia, staphylococcus infection in my hand, urinary tract infection and kidney stone together, shingles, high blood pressure, retinopathy of prematurity. Story 92. Myelomeningitis is an infection in my spinal fluid that caused urinary retention for 3 months. Despite numerous tests, including 2 spinal taps, the cause was never found and it resolved on its own. I worry every day that it will happen again. Story 93. Type 1.5 diabetes, also known as latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, was diagnosed when I was 20 years old. My entire life trajectory changed. My pancreas is damaged like in type 1 diabetes, and my body has insulin resistance like in type 2 diabetes. I have to work out for 1 to 2 hours a day to keep it managed. Story 94. Human papillomavirus causes abnormal cells. Having to have pieces of your cervix cut out multiple times without any anesthesia should be illegal. It is a form of torture. Story 95. Cirrhosis caused severe bleeding. I had to vomit a large amount of blood. I am currently on the waiting list for a liver transplant. Do not be like me. Story 96. Meningitis spread into my bloodstream, causing sepsis. It also affected my knee, neck, and both feet. Story 97. Stage 4 cancer and the side effects of bone deterioration. Currently relearning how to walk and undergoing chemotherapy at the same time. Story 98. Borderline personality disorder is challenging, but effective treatments are available if you are willing to seek help. Story 99. I had measles. I was vaccinated and it was still very difficult. It was not as bad as it could have been, thankfully, but that was 20 years ago when I was a teenager, and my immune system still has not recovered completely. Story 100. Name something. I've had a kidney stone, would rather break both of my legs than go through that again. And I know it's not a disease, but it left me with post-traumatic stress disorder anytime my back hurts. I had scoliosis and the surgery for it. It was terrible. Surgeries twice to patch a hole in one eardrum, both popped and failed. I have dermatographia and I can write your name on my skin as a party trick. The biggest chronic illness I'd say that affected my life was anxiety. My physical symptoms were so bad I couldn't drive my car anymore and my hair was falling out. Story 101. Cancer has just been diagnosed. The doctor is not sure if it was caught early enough to minimize the spread. Nothing else I have ever had has had the potential to outright kill me. Story 102. It's a toss-up between depression, coronavirus disease, and the strain of influenza that left me so weak from fever that I was crawling on the ground. Story 103. When I was a child, I had gastroenteritis but was unable to vomit or have diarrhea. I do not know any details beyond that. However, 30 years later, I still remember the pain in my stomach. Story 104. H1N1 swine influenza back when it was that serious outbreak in 2009. I missed a week of school and was very upset because I missed the gold rush day. I have not been that sick ever again. Story 105. Epilepsy. I am so sick of having my life interrupted by these seizures. I want to be able to enjoy life while I can. I hate being sent to the emergency room. Sometimes it feels like the doctors do not believe me. Story 106. I have had shingles and pneumonia, but the scariest was probably blood poisoning from a cat scratch that I did not treat before heading to church camp. It was a very good thing I informed an adult before it spread further up my leg. Story 107. Type 1 diabetes. I hate it, and I hate the doctors who lied to me and told me, "We're only 5 years away from a cure." Over 25 years ago. Story 108. Cancer. I had Ewing's sarcoma at the age of 15 in 1982. The chemotherapy and radiation treatments were brutal and nowhere near as targeted as they are today. I still experience side effects to this day. Story 109. Vestibulitis and possible interstitial cystitis along with it. It has been a living hell, and I am trying all the medications. It has been a year of feeling like I have to urinate when I do not. I hope it goes away. This is on top of dealing with a difficult postpartum period as well. Story 110. I had an illness a few years ago, possibly a fever. It made me so disoriented that my arms felt like my legs and my legs felt like my arms. I experienced the most horrific headaches imaginable. I was bedridden for a week. Story 111. Eclampsia. Pregnancy nearly killed me in multiple ways. I would never do it again. It also left me with heart issues that I will have for the rest of my life. However, someone else I know who had eclampsia became very disabled from a related stroke. I am glad I did not have that. Story 112. Eclampsia. Pregnancy nearly ended me in multiple ways. I would never do it again. It also left me with heart issues that I will have for the rest of my life. However, someone else I know who had eclampsia became very disabled from a related stroke, so I am glad I did not have that. Story 113. Herpetic stomatitis. I have had cold sores on my lips since I was a child because my parents were not careful. About 5 years ago, I had my first herpetic stomatitis outbreak and thought I had meningitis. My head hurt so much, and my neck was so sore that I felt like I could not hold my head up. Also, the open ulcers on my gums were very painful. I now have nerve pain in my mouth that has not gone away because I still get breakouts occasionally. Story 114. I had pneumonia in kindergarten. Luckily, it was not bad enough to require serious medical attention, but it is not a fun illness to have. Depression is difficult as well. Story 115. There was an influenza I had over one Christmas that was so bad all I wanted to do was lie down and sleep. Just getting up to walk to the bathroom was an awful time. I remember thinking I did not care for most things and just wanted it to be over. Compared to that, coronavirus disease 2019 was only the second worst influenza I ever had. Story 116. Pneumonia almost killed me and left me weak for months, but kidney stones hurt more than I thought was possible. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.